So thank you for attending this parallel session. We're going through the slides right now on what we will be discussing and what we have discussed at this very interesting, we hope, webinar. So the concept is that we're going to go through the issues of hunger in with the general public in mind. And so the general public are the panel of experts. So the discussion topics: what is hunger? Hunger in the food system. Where does your money go? A case study in South Sudan and the G7 Famine Compact commitments. It's a lot to go through. So we'll just get right into it. So what is hunger? So definition: people go a day or days without eating food. And this is something we really need to contemplate and understand. People going a day or days without food. And in Africa, 1 in 5 people are going a day or days regularly without eating food. Globally, 60% of the people who are hungry are women. So hunger disproportionately affects women. This is hunger, but this is not what hunger is. People going a day or days without eating food has consequences, and we call these consequences impact indicators. So mothers will be malnourished and pregnant at the same time. They will suffer from anemia, which will result, both of these components result in babies being born low birth weight, in effect, born malnourished and malnourished in utero. Now, low birth weight is considered a baby anything under 5 pounds in weight. This impacts infant mortality, severe wasting of children, and child mortality. But this also is not hunger, because there is no story behind it. You have not seen what I have seen children dying of malnutrition, babies born low birth weight, mothers that are 32 and 33 kilograms in weight and pregnant, anemic. And perhaps saddest of all, you see the chronic hunger, not saddest of all, but the chronic hunger, the impact it has on communities of mothers never forgetting their children who have died. And regularly this is 1 or 2 children in households who have died, but they're never forgotten. And it is a life completely gone. All that they could have been, all that they could have aspired to be, gone. And ultimately, this is the food system that we have inherited. So the food systems can be defined through 4 processes. You have production, processing, distribution, and consumption. When you add hunger to that mix, it is an issue, a clear issue of distribution and consumption. Clearly, the distribution of food is not leading to the consumption of food. And while this is a processing issue and it is a production issue, there is enough food there to go around. So it's not like we're not producing enough food. But there is another component, and this is subsistence farmers, farmers who grow much of our food are themselves food insecure, are themselves hungry. So when we add this to the mix and we see one of the key outcome indicators that David Beasley, head of the World Food Programme, earlier this month outlined that 9 million people died of starvation in 2020. So the issue of hunger is also an issue of the right to food. It is an issue of the right to life, health, cognitive ability, and it's an issue of life opportunities, because the many people who survive hunger don't truly survive hunger. They're impacted, and that impact leads throughout their life. So where do your donations from the general public go? Where do your donations go? Because it can seem when the general public are asked for funds that it is going into a bottomless pit, and you can see no impact. First of all, these are emergency appeals. They are humanitarian emergencies. This is where humanitarian people are in an emergency situation. So the FAO World Food Programme Early Warning Analysis Hunger Hotspot Report 2020 showed us something of the funding shortfalls and the impact. So here you need to look at, if we pick Afghanistan, so 40%, has a 40% coverage rate. The coverage rate means 40% means that for every 10 people who require an intervention, only 4 receives it. And this is because of lack of funds, lack of funding. Lack of funding leads to this low coverage rate, 4 in 10. 2 in 10 is often reported that who require funding assistance but do not receive it. And clearly international finance and international governments have a role to play. In Yemen, for example, the report outlined that 15 of the United Nations 41 major humanitarian programs had to be reduced or shut down, with 30 more facing cuts in the coming weeks. We're cutting lifelines to humanity, to people. Rations and food distribution is being cut, means that they are eating less than they require, much, much less. So international finance, and particularly for famine and famine prevention. Firstly, we must understand that humanitarian appeals are there because countries cannot afford to fund these issues. They're just too huge. Overseas development aid was committed to give 0.7% of GDP, and this commitment was given in the 1970s because it recognized the fact that the only way out of poverty for poor countries, for the furthest behind, is to financially support and grow their economies and their food production systems. But only 1% of overseas development aid actually goes to nutrition. And the majority of Western developed countries are only reaching 0.4 or 0.3% of their GDP is going to overseas development aid. Currently, there is a shortfall of $5 billion for humanitarian action. And this is to reach 42 million people on the brink of famine right now. On the brink of famine means literally they have nothing. Literally, they are almost completely dependent on humanitarian aid. And like we saw, and the World Food Programme says that it is literally begging for funds. They cannot fulfill this humanitarian need. So if we look at a case study in South Sudan, and this will kind of demonstrate really where we are with the famine and severe, severe food insecurity. So this is South Sudan, and the area we're looking at is Pibor, a name that has been imprinted into my mind since reading this report. 17% of children, only 17% of children are meeting minimum dietary requirements. This means that 83% of children are not. This has led to catastrophic levels of food insecurity and diseases. 60% of households consumed between 0 and 2 meals in the 24-hour period to the survey. And for me, this is where this stuck with me. When I read this, 97% of the households are restricting adult portion size to save food for their children. And it's an instinct as parents that we all have, is we would give before, we would prefer our children to eat before us. And 97% of households use this as a coping strategy. And I think it was at this point when I read this that I decided to fast every Monday for the entirety of 2021 in solidarity with these people, with these mothers and fathers, with these children who are in catastrophic levels of food insecurity. The report says that it is plausible that the current death rate for children under 5 is above the famine threshold. So finally, we will focus on the G7 Global Compact commitments given in May 2021. They recognize that 34 million people are now one step away from famine. At immediate risk are Yemen, South Sudan, and Northeast Nigeria. But if you remember the previous slide where it said that the cuts for Yemen was 15 of the 41 major humanitarian programs in November were being cut because of lack of funding. So the G7 report has broadly said they will progress the G7 approach to food security and nutrition. However, we would say that that approach has led to continuing funding shortfalls. And the Compact have said that it wants its commitments to be monitored at the Food System Summit and Nutrition for Growth. So we will quickly look at which specific commitments have they given. So these commitments outline specific issues, 800 million to Yemen, for example. The figures seem huge, but that's because the humanitarian crisis is huge. And critically, to disperse these funds as soon as possible. Our question for this summit, which we hope will be answered, is have these funds been released? And if so, what has been the impact? Thank you for taking the time to listen to these slides, and we welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you.